Dungeon Master, your guide in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons.
Listen up, because I'm about to tell you about one of the most successful Saturday morning cartoons that ever aired on television. A show that dominated its time slot for 2 straight years, generated over 100 different licenses, and should have run for a decade. But here's the thing. It was canceled after just 3 seasons. Now, you might be thinking, oh, it probably just had bad ratings, right? The kids moved on to something else. But get this. The Dungeons and Dragons cartoon was absolutely crushing it in the ratings. We're talking about a show that was the #1 program in its time slot. This wasn't some struggling series limping along until the network pulled the plug. So what happened? Why would CBS cancel one of their biggest hits? Well, it turns out the show didn't fail because of bad ratings or poor merchandising. It was destroyed by something far more powerful than any dragon or demon in the realm. A full-blown moral panic that convinced America this cartoon was literally corrupting children's souls. And by the way, I'm going to walk you through the entire story, from the show's incredible success to its controversial demise, and even reveal what happened in the finale that never aired. But first, let me show you just how big this thing actually was. Part 1. The Genesis. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's 1983, and the tabletop game, Dungeons and Dragons, is already a massive phenomenon. Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson had created this thing back in 1974, and by the early 80s, it's everywhere. Kids are rolling dice in basements, creating characters, and going on adventures. It's the birth of modern role-playing games as we know them. Now, TSR, the company that owned D&D, they see an opportunity. Saturday morning cartoons are huge business, and they want in. So they team up with Marvel Productions and bring in the legendary Japanese studio Toei Animation to actually make the thing. This is a serious, high-profile production. The premise they came up with was actually pretty clever. Instead of just showing a bunch of fantasy characters fighting monsters, which, let's be honest, would have been fine, they went with what we'd now call an isekai concept. 6 normal teenagers get transported into the D&D realm through a roller coaster ride at an amusement park. One minute they're at the fair, the next minute they're in a fantasy world with magic weapons and monsters trying to kill them. You've got Hank the Ranger, who's basically the leader, Eric the Cavalier, who's the coward but also provides comic relief, Diana the Acrobat, Presto the Magician, Sheila the Thief, and Bobby the Barbarian, who's the youngest of the group. Each kid gets assigned a character class and a magical weapon by this mysterious guide called the Dungeon Master. And here's where it gets interesting. Their entire quest is to find a way home. Every episode, they're trying to get back to the real world, back to their families. But they keep getting sidetracked by having to fight Venger, this evil wizard, and Tiamat, the 5-headed dragon goddess. Now, think about this for a second. The show's entire premise is built on failure. These kids can never actually get home, because if they do, the show's over. So week after week, they come close. They get their hopes up, and then something goes wrong. They're trapped in this dangerous fantasy world, constantly facing death, constantly disappointed. From a storytelling perspective, this creates this dark, almost existential tone. These aren't just kids having adventures. They're displaced, they're desperate, and they're in real danger. And this is a Saturday morning cartoon we're talking about. But you know what? It worked. The writing was sophisticated, the stakes felt real, and kids absolutely loved it. Part 2. The Rise. So, the show premieres on September 17th, 1983, and it's an immediate hit. We're talking about leading its time slot for 2 years straight. 2 years. In the cutthroat world of Saturday morning television, that's an eternity. The show ran for 3 seasons, 27 episodes total, and it was pulling in viewers like crazy. This wasn't some niche thing. This was mainstream success. Kids were tuning in every Saturday morning to see if Hank and the gang would finally make it home. And the quality was there to back it up. There's this episode called The Dragon's Graveyard that has an 8.7 rating on IMDb. That's insane for a Saturday morning cartoon from the 80s. You know why? Because in that episode, the kids actually debate whether they should murder Venger. Not defeat him, not trick him, murder him. CBS almost didn't air it, They were terrified of the moral implications of showing children contemplating cold-blooded killing on Saturday morning TV. But they did air it, and it became one of the most acclaimed episodes of the series. Now, here's where things get really interesting. The show generated over 100 different licenses. Think about that. We're talking toys, lunchboxes, coloring books, bed sheets, you name it. They slapped the D&D cartoon on it. This was a merchandising juggernaut. But here's the weird part. The original toy line didn't even feature the main characters from the show. Instead, they had these generic fantasy figures like Strongheart the Paladin. Some marketing executive who apparently had never played D&D just named the characters himself. It was a complete disconnect from what kids were actually watching on TV. Despite this bizarre decision, the licensing money was rolling in. The show was profitable, the ratings were strong, and everything looked perfect. So, why did it end? Part 3, The Fall. Alright, so to understand what killed this show, you need to understand what was happening in America in the early 1980s. This was the height of the Satanic Panic. This widespread hysteria that Satan worshippers were everywhere, corrupting children through heavy metal music, role-playing games, and yes, cartoons. Conservative groups were absolutely convinced that there was a crisis of the family happening. They believed that media, especially media aimed at kids, was destroying traditional values and leading children into darkness. And Dungeons & Dragons became public enemy number one. There was this woman named Patricia Pulling who founded an organization called BADD, Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons. She went on a crusade, claiming the game was linked to teen deaths by self-harm and occult activity. The media ate it up. Geraldo Rivera did sensationalist specials about it. The hysteria was everywhere. Now here's the thing, none of it was true. The connections between D&D and teen deaths were completely fabricated. The satanic ritual abuse panic was later thoroughly debunked, but at the time, it didn't matter. The fear was real, and it was spreading. So you've got this moral panic swirling around the D&D brand, and then CBS is airing a cartoon about it every Saturday morning. The show became the most visible, most accessible target for activists who wanted to protect children. The National Coalition on Television Violence, a real organization by the way, formally demanded that the Federal Trade Commission mandate a public warning before every episode. They claimed the show had been linked to real-life violent deaths. Think about that. They wanted the government to force CBS to run a warning label on a cartoon about kids trying to get home from a fantasy world. CBS was getting hammered from all sides. Parent groups, religious organizations, media watchdogs, everyone was piling on. The network was constantly having to defend the show's level of violence, even though by today's standards, it's incredibly tame. The thing that ultimately killed the show was a tragedy that had nothing to do with the cartoon itself. A college student disappeared, and when he was later found dead by self-harm, activists immediately blamed Dungeons & Dragons. The media ran with it. The connection was later proven to be completely false. The kid's death had nothing to do with the game, but the damage was done. For CBS, the math was simple. Why keep airing a show that's generating this much controversy, even if it's successful? The public relations nightmare wasn't worth it. The association with teen deaths and moral corruption was toxic. So in December 1985, after just 27 episodes, the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon was canceled. Not because of ratings, not because kids stopped watching, but because the cultural backlash made it impossible to continue. Part 4, The Unfinished Story. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The show was canceled so abruptly that they never got to air the finale. For decades, fans were left wondering, did the kids ever make it home? This led to all kinds of dark fan theories. The most popular one was that the kids had actually died on that roller coaster at the beginning, and the entire show was them trapped in some kind of purgatory or hell. People pointed to the fact that the dungeon master drew his power from something called the underworld as evidence. Pretty dark stuff for a Saturday morning cartoon, right? But there actually was a script. The writer Michael Reeves had written an episode called Requiem that was supposed to be the series finale. It never got produced, but the script eventually leaked, and fans even made their own radio plays and comic book versions of it. So here's what was supposed to happen. The group's two oldest members, Hank and Eric, have this massive falling out. Eric doesn't trust Hank's leadership anymore, and basically mutinies. The group splits up as they search for this key that Venger promised them. A key that's supposed to finally get them home. Eric reaches this abyss where he's supposed to throw the key in, but instead, he uses it to open a sarcophagus. And here's the twist. Venger, the evil wizard they've been fighting for 3 seasons, is actually the Dungeon Master's son. He's been cursed, and the entire journey, all 27 episodes, was an elaborate test orchestrated by the Dungeon Master to redeem his own son. With Venger redeemed and Hank miraculously alive after everyone thought he died, the kids' purpose is fulfilled. They're sent back to the amusement park. They finally make it home. It's actually a pretty sophisticated ending. Instead of just good defeats evil, you get this complex story about redemption, sacrifice, and the relationship between a father and son. It would have been a hell of a finale, but it never aired. And for years, fans had no closure. Part 5, The Legacy. Here's the thing that the Moral Crusaders never understood. The Dungeons & Dragons cartoon was actually one of the best things that ever happened to the D&D brand. For millions of kids in the 80s, this show was their first exposure to fantasy role-playing. They'd never heard of D&D before, never seen a 20-sided die, never created a character sheet, but they watched this cartoon, and suddenly they wanted to know more. The show created a visual language for D&D that's still influential today. When people think about what a D&D adventure looks like, a lot of that imagery comes from this cartoon. The monsters, the magic, the sense of adventure. It all came from Saturday mornings in front of the TV. And here's the ultimate proof that the show was actually great. Wizards of the Coast, the current owners of D&D, have brought these characters back. They're in official source books now. They're in starter sets. There's a whole cartoon classics line of action figures featuring Hank, Diana, Venger, and the rest. Think about that. 40 years later, the company is actively capitalizing on nostalgia for this show. They're integrating these characters into the official D&D canon because they know how much people love them. And the D&D brand? It's bigger than ever. The game brings in over $1 billion in annual revenue now. $1 billion. Much of that is driven by people who first discovered D&D through that cartoon, or through the cultural impact it had. The show that was canceled for being too controversial, too dangerous, too corrupting, it helped build a $1 billion franchise. So here's what we learned. The Dungeons & Dragons cartoon was a massive success that was killed not by audience apathy or creative failure, but by moral panic and cultural hysteria. It dominated its time slot for 2 years, generated millions in licensing revenue, and created a generation of D&D fans. But because it existed during the Satanic Panic, because it became a symbol of everything conservative America feared about modern media, it was canceled at the height of its success. The kids never got to go home, at least not on TV. But the show's legacy survived. It outlasted the panic, outlasted the controversy, and became a beloved piece of 80s pop culture that's still celebrated today. Sometimes the best stories are the ones that get cut short. They leave you wanting more, wondering what could have been. And maybe that's why we're still talking about 6 kids trapped in a fantasy realm 40 years later. But here's something I didn't mention. The Dungeons & Dragons cartoon wasn't the only 80s show that got destroyed by moral panic. There was an entire wave of cartoons that got caught up in this hysteria, and some of them have even darker stories than this one. So click on the video that just popped up on your screen, where I break down the other Saturday morning cartoons that were killed by the culture wars of the 1980s. Trust me, you won't believe what happened to some of these shows. And hey, before I send you off to that next video, I just want to say thank you. Seriously, the support you guys have shown over the past few weeks has been absolutely incredible. The comments, the shares, the discussions, it means everything to me. This channel only works because of you, and I don't take that for granted. So if you enjoyed this deep dive into the D&D cartoon saga, do me a favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment below telling me what 80s show you want me to cover next. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button. And here's the big one. Share this video with your friends who grew up in the 80s. I guarantee they remember this show, and they'll have their own stories about it. The more you share, the more of these deep dives I can make. All right, go click on that video.